What up, it's Shingster94, and welcome to my all-new weapon review of Resident Evil 4 Remake in 4K Ultra High Definition with high dynamic range. I'm really excited to once again return to what's possibly the most popular element of my channel and take a look at all the weapons in this beautifully reimagined game. Now, as always with my weapon reviews, I've got quite a bit to talk about and go over before we finally start seeing the weapons. In fact, if you haven't gathered from the title of the video, for the first time ever, I'm separating these introductions from the main part of the review. So if you don't care to sit through several minutes of informative rambling and want to get straight into the weapon showcase, please proceed to the first part of the actual weapon review. Just know that I commentate throughout the entire review, so it's not going to be a silky smooth, uninterrupted showcase if that's what you were hoping for. So, a quick share of opinion, I think this is the best remake of a Resident Evil game since the 2002 remake of the first original game, and by far the best remake and overall game in the RE Engine lineup. I truly believe this game followed a delicate formula of what makes a remake surpass the original by staying extremely faithful to the source material and spicing it up with a few new additional surprises and some larger character backstories. Yes, you heard me correctly, Resident Evil 4 Remake surpasses the original Resident Evil 4 for me, and at this current point in time is now my second favorite Resident Evil game in the series. That viewpoint, however, can always change with time, as I recall once saying Resident Evil 2 Remake was my all-time favorite game, and many years ago, around when my channel was conceived, Resident Evil 5 was my favorite game of all time. So, take my opinions very lightly, as I do yours, because I'm smart enough to know that opinions aren't facts, and there are no right or wrong opinions, no matter how regurgitated or controversial they are respectively. Now let's get talking specifically about the weapons. As I mentioned earlier, this game is extremely faithful to its original counterpart, with the element of weapons being no exception. Nearly every weapon has been brought back with their similar individual attributes and ways to go about retrieving or unlocking them. However, there are a small number of weapons that either didn't get considered for the remake or were completely redesigned. I'm sad to say that one of them is my all-time favorite weapon of the franchise, the PRL 412. Regardless, the fact that a majority of the weapons have returned is gonna make this weapon review pretty fun to go through and compare to the original weapon review. That being said, I am going to do a side-by-side comparison of OG versus Remake when we initially go over the weapons and their statistics. To save time and energy though, I won't compare the weapons being used in action, just the overall looks. I'm also going to introduce a brand new feature for weapon reviews, starting with this one, and that's providing a reference to the weapon's real-life counterpart on screen if one's provided. The risk with this is some over-enthusiastic gun nuts watching this video may be compelled to try to correct me in the possible case that I referenced the wrong weapon, which can happen because my source for in-real-life weapons is the Internet Movie Firearms Database, or imfdb.org, which can be edited and changed by virtually anyone. Nevertheless, I think it will be a fun new addition to my weapon reviews. Now, being an RE Engine game, there are some features from previous games that make it into this one, such as the ability to craft ammunition with the use of gunpowder and other materials. In this game, those materials are known as resources, both small and large, and different types of ammo require one or the other with a certain amount of gunpowder. As you can see here, you can craft flash grenades and hand grenades as well. What's even cooler is the ability to craft bolts using certain knives and the resources. Speaking of knives, this game probably has the single largest number of different equipable knives in any Resident Evil game, which comes out to a total of 5. This is probably because, along with the crafting ability, this game heavily emphasizes on the use of knives by way of an all-new parry mechanic, taking the place of the dodge function from Resident Evil 3 Remake and the block mechanic of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard and Resident Evil Village. The parry is the ultimate defense maneuver of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Many different enemy attacks can be deflected using this mechanic and could even set you up for a punishing melee move. And harkening back to Resident Evil 2 Remake, the knives can also be used as defensive items in the case of being grappled by an enemy. However, neither of the grenades can be used defensively. Also, durability makes a return for all of the knives, and I get quite embarrassed looking back at my weapon review for Resident Evil 2 Remake and hearing myself fail miserably to use the proper term.
You see that line below the depiction of the knife? That represents the amount of, I don't know, knife stamina it has left.
Anyway, durability is now a considerable statistic because for the first time ever, some knives can be tuned up and upgraded by the merchant, which by the way, of course, is in the remake. Simple knives are discarded upon breaking, while larger combative knives can be repaired and reused. Now for the final bit of introductions, a summary of how my weapon reviews traditionally go. Once again, this is good for newcomers of my channel who are interested in following or subscribing, or for dedicated fans who enjoy seeing flashbacks of previous weapon reviews while I go over every step. For this summary, I will use footage from my OG RE4 weapon review, which seems appropriate being this is a remake of the said game. I begin by sorting the weapons into classes or categories and go through them in a specific order, starting with non-firearms, specifically bladed melee weapons, then proceed on to explosive sub-weapons such as grenades. From there, I turn the heat up with showcasing firearms, traditionally starting with semi-automatic pistols, then submachine guns and automatics, then shotguns, then sniper rifles, then magnums, then explosive weaponry, and finally special weapons, whether they're unlockable or in specific areas of the game. Now in the OG RE4 weapon review, I reviewed the weapons in the listed order from the merchant. In this review, however, I'm going to follow my traditional order. For each individual weapon, I first examine it in the game's inventory for a close-up view and read out its description if provided. Beginning with later reviews on my channel, I follow up with showing the location of the weapon if it can be found without purchasing or unlocking. If the weapon has custom parts, then I also show the location of those if applicable. From there, I proceed to test out the weapon in a preferably well-lit area and demonstrate its firing and reloading animations with one of the shots slowed down. If the weapon has any special abilities or actions, I try to show those as well. In some games, including both versions of Resident Evil 4, I will test the weapons first at base level with no upgrades or parts. Then I'll show the weapons maxed out with full upgrades and all parts. After the initial tests, I share any opinions I may have on the weapon, then announce which enemy I desire to test the weapon's firepower on. I typically try to use the same exact enemy for the entirety of weapons contained within their class. For example, all pistols are tested on a basic enemy such as a zombie or ganado. This allows for adequate comparison of the number of shots it took to defeat the enemy with different weapons of the same category, and of course, with no upgrades and full upgrades are demonstrated. After reviewing the results, I conclude the weapon, then follow up with in-game cutscenes showing the weapon in action. Then the next weapon begins and the whole process is repeated until eventually all of the weapons of the game have been showcased. Another tradition of my weapon reviews since their inception, and perhaps most of my closest followers' favorite part, is to perform a critical headshot on the game's most basic enemy with the most powerful Magnum class weapon. These headshots are the staple of my acclaimed weapon intros that open these weapon reviews. Alrighty people, I have rambled on far too long and I deserve a drink of water after all that. And if you've stuck around this whole time, you are a trooper of the patience department and are deserving of my respect. But wait no more, it is finally time to review the weapons of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I'm going to take a brief moment here and introduce you guys to the hub that I'll be using for this weapon review. Figure this is a great place. This is the very first time you meet the merchant, and this place is bathed in natural light. Although, I feel like it could be a little better because we do have a bit of overcast here, but the only other place I really could have done this was the village center, and ultimately the reason I decided against it is because there's not a merchant that's close enough to it. I mean, there is a merchant in the very beginning of the game once you do New Game Plus, but it requires trekking like a good quarter of a mile between the village center and the merchant, so I didn't want to go back and forth just to get the best lighting. So this will do. It's plenty of light, and it's a very natural setting and right next to a merchant. So yep, this is going to be my hub for the weapon review.